I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Lauren Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to hold my first adjournment debate in this House. I sought this debate because I am conscious that the forthcoming budget is rapidly approaching, and I wanted to raise the cliff edge for funding of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, or UK SPF, with members and ministers. Any future funding of the UK SPF is, of course, a matter for the Chancellor, but I'd like to use this debate today to discuss the merits of the fund, how we can learn from the experiences implementing it over the last few years in local government in particular, and the approach to local growth funds under the new Labour government. We know that the government's top mission is to boost economic growth across the UK. It is my firm belief that a new, improved version of the UK SPF could make an important contribution to this, while also supporting local communities and boosting regeneration efforts. I thank the Minister for Democracy and Local Growth for his attendance today. I know he cares strongly about local growth and supporting community cohesion, and I look forward to hearing his response at the debate's conclusion. The UK SPF was introduced as the domestic replacement for the European Structural and Investment Fund after Brexit. The previous funding provided by the Conservative government did not match the European structural funds, but it did provide local authorities with some devolved funding to support local priorities, with particular emphasis on regeneration, business support and skills. The UK SPF began in December 2022 and is due to end in March 2025. While by no means perfect, I believe it has had a broadly positive impact, and I would like to draw on my own experience as a former Medway Council Cabinet member responsible for distributing the UK SPF today. Feedback from Whitehall to officials at the Council has been that Medway Council's approach was considered best practice, and hence I am keen that the Minister hears about our experience. I know he is a big supporter of local government and evidence-based policy making, and will no doubt wish to hear from any other members of the House who also have direct experience of the UK SPF. In Medway, we used our UK SPF allocation to support local community groups, businesses and charities who we considered were best placed to know what their areas needed to thrive. So rather than a top-down approach, we asked communities what they needed and functioned as a facilitator to make things happen using the UK SPF. The feedback we received was that this approach was empowering for local communities and brought people together. A SPF network was established that created a mutually supportive community that in later years led to joint bids for community projects. The UK SPF's potential to support broader regeneration efforts to revitalise our town centres is significant. In Medway, small pots of money delivered significant economic and social benefits. One of the ways I was particularly keen to use the UK SPF was to help our town centre forums host high street events on the basis that this would bring in thousands of extra visitors and benefit local businesses. A notable example of this is the Chatham Chinese New Year Festival, held earlier this year in what is now my constituency, which was the biggest such celebration in the UK outside London and led to an approximate 25% increase in footfall on Chatham High Street. The festival was free to attend and saw a parade, street food, a market, traditional dances and martial arts masterclasses. The Chatham Town Centre Forum partnered with the local Chinese Association, the shopping centre, Medway Youth Council and local schools and charities to put on the event. Feedback from residents and vendors was unanimously supportive. Materials purchased using the UK SPF will enable the event to run for future years without financial support from the Council, so the UKS will be leaving a lasting impact. And I think this is really important because we want schemes like the UK SPF, where possible, to deliver those longer-term benefits. I'd like to briefly turn to a few other ways we use the UK SPF to support longer-term improvements in Medway. We offered small feasibility funds, as little as £5,000 pots, to help groups demonstrate that an idea would work, and they could then use this proof of concept to go on to attract funding from other sources to make it happen. We helped community groups like the Chatham Intra-Cultural Consortium to transition into a charitable incorporated organisation, or CIO, and achieving this new structure means they can bid for other sources of funding and are less reliant on financial support from the council. And that means they can continue their incredibly important heritage work. Helping groups get on a more financially sustainable footing is particularly important in the context of years of constrained local government finance. We also use the UK SPF to provide grants to help businesses grow by purchasing modern technology and equipment. For instance, a gift business specialising in handmade travel keepsakes was able to use the grant to invest in a new fibre laser machine, which significantly enhanced the productivity and efficiency of the business and allowed businesses to handle larger orders. And we also funded net zero audits and green grants for local businesses who wanted to reduce their operating costs by making their premises more energy efficient and also getting those green certificates that are now needed to bid for many contracts. Over 30 local businesses have... Happy to give way. Yeah, happy to give way.
Does the member agree how important SPF is to areas like mine in Cornwall, Truro and Falmouth, that lost their EU structural ERDF and ESF funding when we came out via Brexit of the EU, and how fundamental it is that there is some sort of replacement fund for that in the future?
Thank you very much. I absolutely agree, and it's certainly something that I will be putting the case for later on in my contribution. I thank her for hers. I mean, in my constituency, over 30 local businesses have so far been supported to reduce their costs and grow their business and contribute to helping us reach net zero under these UK SPF funded programmes, and we wouldn't be able to do that without this replacement funding for the EU structural funds. I'm very conscious that in this final funding year, the focus of UK SPF spending is on people and skills, and I think it will be very important for ministers and others to assess the impact these projects have on helping economically inactive people into good quality training and work. These examples I have given today are just really a snapshot of the ways that local councils across the UK have used UK SPF. Overall, I consider the UK SPF fund has worked well in my constituency, and I understand obviously it's worked well in others too, which is great to hear. It's delivered the economic growth and the regeneration aims that this new government is committed to really boosting much further. But despite these successes, there have been challenges with the UK SPF, and it is appropriate that we consider them now as the existing funding cycle is coming to a close. Broader feedback from local authorities to the Local Government Association has highlighted a number of issues. First is short timescales from Whitehall. So local authorities were given just 3 months to develop UK SPF investment plans in collaboration with local stakeholders. I really feel that we need to give people more time to get the right approach and more emphasis on long-term strategic planning. The LGA has proposed that any future version of the UK SPF considered by the government adopts a 6 to 8 year funding cycle, and that's an approach that I would certainly endorse. We also need to reflect the impact of single-year funding. So the annual funding allocation of UK SPF often led to local authorities commissioning services for just 12 months, really to manage that financial risk. And for some projects, of course, that is perfectly appropriate. But for those local areas that were using UK SPF for business or skills support, for example, that made it more difficult to address some of the longer-term issues and inequalities that are existing within our communities. Also, central government restrictions. From my point of view, the requirement that skills be addressed in year 3 was an unnecessary restriction. We should trust local authorities to collaborate with their local partners to address community needs without such restrictions. I also consider there is scope to improve and streamline the UK SPF reporting process, which some feedback has indicated was overly bureaucratic. It is, of course, important that the government receives assurance that funding has been spent appropriately and used effectively, but I think a finer balance will need to be struck in future. And finally, I'm also aware there were some delays in getting money out the door to local authorities to fund the agreed projects, and so it's important that this too is considered by the new minister for any future approach to local growth funding. I'd like to return to the immediate challenge we face, the expiration of the funding to support the UK SPF at the end of March 2025. Without continued funding of some sort, the type of initiatives that I have highlighted today will struggle to continue or be replicated. I'm not aware of any existing funding that would help fill this gap. And for those longer-term services like business support and employability programs that rely on establishing trust and employing staff, the cliff edge is of particular concern. Providers are likely to see staff leave as contracts get closer to their end date, putting at risk efforts to support businesses and help people get into work and stay in good, stable employment. So it's for these reasons that I'm joining with the LGA to urge the Minister to work with the Chancellor to include an additional 1 year of flexible revenue funding for the UK SPF in the forthcoming budget. The LGA has suggested funding should equate to the value of the year 3 of the current UK SPF programme, and I ask the Minister to consider that as part of his discussions with the Chancellor. Doing so would remove the immediate cliff edge and give ministers time to consider what the new government's approach to local growth funds should be. As I have set out today, I consider longer-term allocations are needed alongside a more flexible and lighter-touch national framework that supports even greater local decision-making. It will also give time to assess the full outputs of the UK SPF and what improvements can be made for a future replacement fund. I'm certainly pleased to say that the outcomes achieved by Medway Council already exceed those set out in the original UK SPF investment plan that was submitted to Whitehall some years ago. And that data, alongside data from lots of other local authorities, should be available to ministers, and I think can provide a really valuable steer on what approaches proved successful and what didn't work. So to conclude, I'm really confident that by learning from the past and working in partnership with local government to deliver a more flexible, longer-term funding scheme, the new government could provide a real boost to local economies and communities that goes far beyond anything that we've seen in the current UK SPF funding cycle.
Minister, Alex Norris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a pleasure to respond on behalf of the Government to the excellent speech made by my honourable friend. I'm conscious, Madam Deputy Speaker, that when I spoke in closing for the Government yesterday, my contribution lasted some unlikely 48 minutes, and I am delighted, not least because my voice is a little on the cusp, that the rules of the House will prevent such a reoccurrence. But I would like to begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Rochester and Strood, on securing the debate and for the strength of case that she made. It is clear from what she said and what she said previously, and I'm similarly grateful for the question she asked me at departmental oral questions last week, of how strongly she feels about the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, but also the work that she did in Medway and the impact that she made in Medway with this fund. There's clearly an awful lot to learn from the Medway example, and I look forward to doing that when we meet again shortly after the conference recess.
I'm grateful to the Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, for giving way, and grateful to my honourable friend from Rochester and Stroud for securing this really important debate. Scotland has been the beneficiary of the Shared Prosperity Fund to the tune of £212 million since 2022, over 70 million of which has come to my home city of Glasgow. Does the Minister agree with me that this is a demonstration of the union dividend of which Scotland and the nations and regions of the United Kingdom enjoy by being part of this union? And does he further agree with me that the Shared Prosperity Fund is an important vehicle for bringing equity to the regions and nations of the United Kingdom?
My honourable friend raises a very important point. The United Kingdom government is ambitious for growth across all of the United Kingdom, and our commitment is a four nations one. And we look forward to, in all sorts of strands of local growth funding, working closely with colleagues in Scotland to make sure that people across Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland get the benefits of growth and that dividend of which he speaks. And to the particular point on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, again, I agree with the effectiveness, and of course we'll talk about its future, as I know colleagues are very keen for me to do.
Would the Minister give way?
I give way happily.
Jonathan Davis.
Thank you. I also welcome the Honourable Lady from Rochester and Strood for this important debate. Councils across the country, including those in Derbyshire, have faced appalling cuts over the last decade or so. But the UK SPF has been one of the very few points of light in what was a very dark decade for local authorities. I warmly welcome the new government's commitment to offer councils a 3-year funding settlement, but can I encourage him to lobby the Treasury to see what more it can do for local authorities, because the important services they provide are really on the cusp of being inaccessible to people.
My honourable friend makes a very important point about the health of local government, and I, like many colleagues, am a veteran of local government and very conscious of the pressures they're under. And I'm also conscious that as we design a new model for local growth, local authorities will be at the heart of making that effective. So if they don't have the capacity because of those pressures, that will be a limiting factor on our success. So I'm very, very mindful of that. With regard to the UK SPF itself, I've seen firsthand the very good work that the funding's done in my own constituency and appreciate why there's such interest in its future. It's helped support organisations addressing unemployment and providing training, such as the Bestwood Partnership, such as Evolve, that have made a huge difference to our community. It's also backed community projects like the Kimberley Community Garden, allowing them to redevelop their site and continue important community outreach work. So I understand very strongly why there's such interest. As the Honourable Member said, funding and future funding is a matter for the Chancellor and the budget. Of course, the ongoing spending review and the budget for the 30th of October. I appreciate the frustration that comes with that answer, but I'm afraid it is the point as we are at the moment. But I don't think that prevents me from addressing a number of the points that the Honourable Member made in her opening. Because again, it is one of the beauties of the electoral cycle and of our democracy, Madam Deputy Speaker, that a change election brings in colleagues with lots of different experiences. And in this case, the Honourable Member talks about the impact that the £3.3 million has made from UK SPF in Medway, and she talked about the work that she's done to design it, and as I say, I'm very keen to learn from it. And it's very good to hear how this funding has supported growth to the high streets and towns, increasing footfall, bringing support to local businesses, also regenerations for the town centre of Chatham, of Rainham, of Gillingham, addressing local challenges and, crucially, opportunities alongside community leaders. And I know that it's supported projects like Emerge Advocacy, which supports young people struggling with their mental health, mutual aid road reps formed during the COVID pandemic to combat loneliness and isolation. Hugely significant projects that reach people that often the hardest to reach, and this fund has backed them. And similarly, and very attractively, as the Honourable Member said, has been making sure there's been great events going on in Medway, like the Chinese New Year, like Easter celebrations, heritage awareness, and intralateral arts festivals. So lots of great things, and it's shown that the model that for Medway, if you put local people in charge, you let them set local priorities, it really yields great results, including a significant increase in town centre footfall and cultivating that greater sense of community. So when the Honourable Member, I will shortly, so when the Honourable Member says that that Medway is a model, I think there is a lot of evidence for that, and I look forward to hearing that. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The query I have about is the current version of the Shared Prosperity Fund, and some of the capital projects that are going on at the moment are time limited to the end of March. Some of those capital projects won't be finished by the end of March, and the local authorities are rushing to try and complete them, which is spending more money because they're worried that some of that money may be clawed back, the current money, not the future money. Could the Minister confirm that he's considering about those existing projects, that won't be an issue and that money won't be clawed back so those projects can be completed?
I'm grateful for that intervention. I mean, as the Honourable Member knows, I've inherited some 15, 16, 17 strands of local growth funding, all at different stages, all decisions made in many cases many years ago, and we're trying to make the most sense and the best value out of them. With particular regard to those projects, I'd encourage the Honourable Member to help her projects engage with my officials so they can give clarity on precisely what the timelines are in the context of what will then may well be discussed as part of the budget. But I'm very happy to work with her to make sure that happens. Turning to some of the challenges to UK SPF that my honourable friend mentions, we have to start, of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the future for the programme, because local authorities, honourable and right honourable members, organisations across the country that deliver projects have rightly been seeking clarity on what comes next, and my mailbag is very, very full, and we are giving full consideration. We're recognising the hard work undertaken, and I do know, and I think it's important that this is stated from this dispatch box, we recognise the challenges that time poses, and I know that organisations that traditionally are funded with annual cycles mean they constantly have to put hard-working members of staff on 90-day redundancy notices, the pressures that puts on people who then perhaps seek other work, because it doesn't suit them and their life, and why would it? And we understand that, that those cliff edges are not a good thing, and they are our forefront of our minds as we think about the future.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I add my congratulations to my honourable friend from Rochester and Strood for securing this debate, and thank her for doing so at such an important moment. We've heard from my honourable friend, the member from Glasgow South West, about the importance of the Shared Prosperity Fund for his area, and I was really glad to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister to my constituency during the general election, where she saw some of the need for this funding. And Fife has benefited greatly from over £13 million from the Shared Prosperity Fund in recent years. In my constituency of Cowdenbeath and Kirkcaldy, this includes projects like Step On, which is run together by Link Living and the Wraith Rovers Community Foundation. It provides targeted help for young people to improve their mental health.
Members, interventions must be short.
Employability and, crucially, to access work. And I wonder if the Minister agrees with me that this funding is hugely important for areas like mine, where inequality is an issue, and indeed to provide cross-UK funding.
I'm very grateful for that intervention. I mean, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I could probably speak for most colleagues that when I say that the general election was in many regards quite a tricky one this time. But one of the few sources of joy, I think, was my right honourable friend, the Deputy Prime Minister's battle bus, which seemed to reach admirable distances up and down, and indeed in Fife, and I know from having spoken to her how much she enjoyed that visit. I think that model really is a great example of the impact that's being made to people's lives across Fife, and indeed in many different parts of the UK, and we are very mindful of that. I just want to address the challenges points that my honourable friend mentioned. She started with timescales. I mean, the tiny run-in, certainly in year one, is not an example of good practice, and something we would always seek to avoid. I don't think the government of the day thought it was a good idea, but they think they've rather found themselves as kind of victim of circumstances, and we absolutely hear that. She mentions the Local Government Association and their desire for a 6 to 8 year funding window, and again, I understand that very well. I mean, I have to say that is quite challenging. Government's budget on generally a 3-year cycle, and often the decisions are made on a 1-year cycle. And one of the things we've talked about, as my honourable friend said, is that we want to give more certainty in a longer time period. I can't commit to 6 to 8 years, but I can commit to that principle. She also mentioned the impact of single-year funding. As I said earlier, we very much understand that. And the point on central restrictions and on monitoring, again, I think this is one of the places where the new government intends to diverge from the old one. My view in this is that we need to give communities up and down the UK the tools and the resources to use their expertise to improve their community within the framework set by the Prime Minister and his missions for the country. They are the experts, not the Minister in this case. And again, we want to be lighter touch on monitoring. We want to be less directive in what funding's for. Actually, UK SPF is a very good example of that, relative to other local growth funding, but I hear some of the challenges there. So, those are important design challenges that I think we can engineer out as part of any future local growth funding programming. And, just to say, and I'm conscious a little bit of time, but just to say that, our model of local growth is reflected in the conversations that we've had with local authorities and with communities up and down the country. We know there is a desire to move to a more allocative settlement, Madam Deputy Speaker, fewer beauty parades, a stronger focus on deprivation and need. We know that there's a real desire for, as I say, that lighter touch in terms of monitoring, which can become a cottage industry in itself, and that is our view too. There are things that will shape our future. Growth is at the heart of it. Local growth funding, the clue will be in the name. We want to see the projects that local communities choose are ones that drive growth. Similarly, we have to, of course, start in the context of the inheritance left by the previous government with regards to the fiscal picture. And then crucially, and the honourable member penned an article this morning on a well-known Labour-leaning blog, and the thing that I took from that was the mutual desire from this government and from local government to reset the relationship so that it is a better partnership, because I think that that's what will drive better outcomes, because then that leads us to a whole, I think, more positive place, that if the local authority is properly in the room and engaged, that means that they can use their creativity to perhaps combine funding with other funding streams, making funding go further. And, you know, as I say, I think UK SPF has been a very good model of that, but we will make those changes, particularly around short-term timescales, particularly around reducing some of the burdens, particularly around a reset of relationship with local government. And, you know, notwithstanding what we'll be talking about on the 30th of October, those principles will guide everything we do with regards to local growth. So, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, we as a government are committed to growth across the UK. We were elected on a manifesto that stressed a partnership approach with local authorities and an intention to stabilise the funding system. We're going to do that. We are and will continue to work closely with local authorities, with stakeholders, Scottish Parliament, the Senate and the Northern Ireland Executive to ensure that there is a smooth transition to a new funding regime. And I look forward to visiting Northern Ireland on Monday to talk further with colleagues interested in the UK SPF. And of course, honourable friends are rightly seeking certainty. You know, I know that they want that as soon as possible. We at least have a little bit of a pathway as to when that will come, because there will of course be important announcements made at the budget, as there always are, on the 30th of October, and then of course the ongoing spending review will shape the future. So we hear the messages strongly from colleagues. It's brilliant to hear the excellent work done in Medway and in other parts of the country, and I'm keen to work with colleagues as we go forwards to shape local growth funding. Thank you.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as that opinion say aye. The ayes have it. Order, order.